Thank you so much for joining us today. Um, Here, we're going to get started here in just a second. My name is Betsy Lizega. I'm with the Florida PBIS project. And I am here today with, I will let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kat Rollerson. I am the project state coordinator and also technical assistance up here in the Jacksonville area. So I'll be joining Betsy to help facilitate this chat today.
Thank you, Kat. And this chat today, we're going to be talking about coaching, coaching within the multi-tiered system of support for behavior. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on coaching at tier 2. So we would love to get to know you guys a little bit, if you don't mind. Maybe in the chat, you could let us know what's your current role in supporting tier 2. So are you a school-based coach? Are you a district level coach? Are you an interventionist or a teacher that's involved in providing intervention? So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys just a couple of minutes here in the chat to let us know.
I'm seeing thank you so much for those already responding. We have a behavior resource teacher, a PBS coordinator, and a new district role, Steve, I see, for MTSS coordinator, focus on interventions. District level coach. Perfect little audience starting us off here today.
Yeah, oh wow, we've got a good
You doing
range
great.
of roles from school level to district level.
That's great.
And I think we've got something for everyone here today. So thank you guys so much for answering us in the chat.
Yeah, I love that. All perfect roles. I love the coaching teacher and tracking data. This will be right up your alley.
Definitely. So we have about an hour together and it goes by extremely fast. But what we hope to accomplish in this chat is we're going to first start off kind of looking at the big picture of that multi-tiered system of support as a whole before we start zooming into the tier 2. So we're going to look at first some reminders at tier 1 because we all know that that is the foundation for our system. So having that strong tier 1 foundation is going to really set us up for success for tier 2 and the outcomes we'd like to see. And I don't know how other people's brains work, but for me, the best way to see those concepts, those tier 2 concepts and the coaching elements is to kind of see those examples and resources and how they work in real life. So Kat is going to walk us through some of those practical examples so it becomes less theoretical and more, um, actual things you may do. But we are going to start kind of with this framework. And in the chat, thank you so much, Brooke. She posted a link to the handouts for today. So you're going to see a lot of resources that we'll be using, and a lot of them have hyperlinks. So you'll be able to see the full version of these documents. So this one that you see here, this is our kind of zoomed out lens of the multi-tiered systems of support and how we can build that system to include resiliency skills as well. And we're looking at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So at each tier, you'll see that the framework looks very similar, but the tools that we use are going to be different for screening and then for the tools that we select for intervention and instruction and how frequently, obviously, we do those reviews and progress monitoring so that we can with those more intensive levels of support, you'll see more of those more frequent progress monitoring and outcome reviews. So this is a really nice illustration of kind of how everything comes together into that unifying framework and becomes more intense and targeted as we go along. So we're going to start with kind of a brief review of that first layer that you see highlighted there, which is our tier 1. So when we're thinking about this, thinking with the tier 1 lens, what are some items of strength at tier 1 for your PBIS team? What do you think works really well for your team at tier 1? And then on the other side of the coin, what are some potential barriers? So if you work with a tier 1 team or you support teams at tier 1, what are some of the things that you see as strengths and potential weaknesses or barriers in that team? So I'm going to open it up to some discussion here in the chat and let us know kind of some things that you see.
Thanks, Betsy. And just because I noticed we forgot a hyperlink there, I did put the integrated resource map in the chat for everyone.
Well,
But
thank you so much.
sure. But otherwise, would love to hear what some strengths are for tier one, using data in your teams that you support. What are some strengths that you have or barriers? Oh, thank you, Jessica. I see following through with classroom expectations. That's a great strength to have, Jessica. Awesome.
Definitely.
Oh, okay. I see that, Stephen. Fully agree. Sometimes educators or teachers are not familiar with all three levels of intervention. They're real focused on their tier one content and classroom expectations, as Jessica mentioned. See that? So that can be a barrier, and you have to do a lot of coaching. Thank you, Steve and Jessica. I really appreciate that. Anyone else on the call, strengths or barrier? Oh, see that too, Jessica. Redirection of unwanted behaviors privately. Oh, it's a great reminder. And that's all in that classroom instruction intervention column that Betsy had just showed. So part of those big five classroom practices, redirection of unwanted and doing it privately. Great.
So before PBIS teams engage in problem solving, they should first ensure that their PBIS team meetings are running effectively and efficiently. We can't do this as one person, and at tier two as well. This is not a one person show. We need to make sure we have a team. And so you'll see on the right-hand side that we've got some prerequisites for establishing and maintaining that well-run team. So some of the key tips that you'll see here, we want to be reviewing data at least monthly to problem solve any of those tier one barriers. We want to look at the functioning of the team. So is the team using the time wisely? So reviewing outcomes, looking at data, making sure that we are, that we have this team that has the skills and the knowledge and the resources to make decisions. And of course, actively problem solving and using that four-step process to figure out how to plan for better outcomes. And lastly, that you have some sort of action plan and you've got the end in mind, but you're keeping track of all the steps along the way, those to-do items that help you to keep propelling forward. And so hopefully you guys have seen this before. This is how we summarize the what of those school-wide expectations. What do we want to teach? We want schools to think about what students need to be successful on their campus and be very intentional with the teaching of those schools within those relevant environments. So the what starts broadly with our expectations that are the same throughout the school. And then we drill down further with those rules and routines. So the broadly stated expectations allow for teachers to have autonomy within their classroom by developing, the rules and routines around those school-wide expectations that we all share. But then they can make them fit for within their environment. And we want to make sure that we're following these guidelines within that tier one system. And then on the left-hand side, you'll also see this broken down a little bit more at the classroom level. And we'll talk about that again on the next slide as well. So we begin with those school-wide expectations, and those are, our core values that we hope to all live by on our campus, including adults. And they become like the standards for our school-wide behavior curriculum, just like we have academic standards. And then we have to break down what those expectations will look like in each setting around the campus so that we can explicitly teach the skills that the students need to be successful to follow those standards. So this is a great example of a school-wide matrix, and it identifies the expectations across the left, and then it gives us a variety of school-wide settings and what we would need to what a student would need to demonstrate in order to be successful in following the expectations in that particular setting. And then there's also a link here on the bottom to look at a classroom teaching matrix. So that would be more specific and broken down for the different classroom types of settings or routines and kind of step by step breaking those down. You'll also see that there's a little lesson plan here. So this would be those broken down kind of concepts related to the expectation that we would be teaching to students.
Betsy, I remember I put a little cheat sheet there on the lesson because we're going to talk about social skill intervention as one of the examples
Ooh.
later. And just reminding that tier one, we're built on, as a PBS framework, we're built on social skill instruction already. So whatever we do at tier one to teach that teaching matrix, once we define the teaching matrix, then we're teaching social skills. Similar to Steve's point in the chat, if we're having to coach what it looks like across tiers, it's a really nice reminder that social skill instruction is built across all three tiers. So if
Yes,
we're
thank you for
already doing it
sharing.
tier one, yeah, sure. I'm just jumping in with you with that. And then as she goes into classroom, I just was pointing out in the chat too that Jessica, you had noted that right off the bat, those classroom expectations that model that. And I'll let you keep going, Betsy.
No, I appreciate you stepping in with that, because those tier two, the concepts that we're teaching at tier two, they shouldn't be foreign. They should be things that we've already touched instructionally at tier one, in terms of, classroom behaviors and all of the social skills that we're teaching to students just as part of their tier one curriculum. So thank you. And this slide, it helps to illustrate those 5 essential practices at the classroom level that we use to help build classroom PBIS. And these are all of so sort of the secret sauce for having a well-managed classroom, including things like maximizing structure, having those expectations and rules, keeping students engaged, acknowledging appropriate behavior and responding to that inappropriate behavior. And we have some great tools, if you haven't seen them before, kind of breaking down each of those essential elements of classroom PBIS, and what that looks like and how we can use those practices to help support that resiliency. So there's a link to that there, and there is also a link to a crosswalk resource so you can kind of see how it connects to resiliency. And I just wanted to kind of take us now. We've looked a little bit at tier one and those potential items that we can coach at tier one to help support that foundational practice, coaching teachers and using the expectations and rules within the classroom, developing routines and rules, teaching those lesson plans, looking at data. Those are all the areas we would focus on as a coach at tier one. And so now we're going to take tier two and look at it from that coaching lens as well. And so just like at tier one, tier two, we really want to begin with that strong team. It's definitely one of the most critical elements, necessary elements. So we want to ask ourselves, in our coaching role, do we have a team? Is there a team? Does the team understand what their role is? And the activities that they should be accomplishing as part of that tier two team. So it's really important that the team understands that tier two, as a tier two team, our purpose isn't to necessarily discuss individual progress of students. That's not our main purpose at tier two as a team. We are focused on building and refining the system. So just like at tier one, it's about keeping that system functioning well so that we see the outcomes we want to see. So on the left, you'll see this is a great handout of the kind of entire tier two behavioral system and all of the different components. So that is a handout that you can print and kind of go through with your team. And then the visual on the right are little snippets from that previous illustration, all the different areas of tier two that we might focus on when we're coaching. So looking at screenings, does the team have an understanding of screening and the different types of screening tools we can use at tier two for behavior? And then how often are we doing that screening? That screening is going to help us to make sure we're identifying students in need of tier two intervention and that we're not missing anybody. And then the second coaching component that we're going to focus on is planning intervention and making sure that our intervention is matched based on our screening tools. So giving students the types of interventions that they need, And then also making sure that we are using really sound, really evidence-based tier two interventions. And then the last piece is that we're progress monitoring. We know what progress monitoring tools we're going to use. And we have decision rules, both for how students enter into tier two intervention, and then also that we have that exit criteria. So students aren't sitting in tier two indefinitely, but we have like a goal in mind for how we can measure that success. And so this is a great example of decision rules. You'll see in the center here, actually there's a couple of them. In the center here is some criteria that we can set for identifying students that are at low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. And those students, like the cutoff scores for each of those different areas. So you can look at those referrals. You can look at screening tools that are delivered seasonally throughout the year that look at behaviors that we might flag as being high risk or medium risk. Of course, we look at absences. We want to make sure that students are attending school, that they aren't in excess of absences. And we want to make sure that we know what that means. What is a high number of absences? Have we defined that? And of course, tardies, ISS, and OSS. So these are some of the areas that you could come up with decision rules about at your school. And then also you can see a smaller example here on the left is just some entry criteria, meeting at least 2 criteria from the cutoff score grid at moderate risk level, or 2 moderate risk and 1 high risk. So taking all that information and saying, okay, which students have these particular criteria? That will be our entry criteria. Some other examples of different decision rules, maybe a student misses more than, 10 days in the first semester, or student has X number of incomplete work assignments. Some schools don't have a lot of discipline referrals, and that may not be the best measure for your tier 2 system. It may be something that has to do more with their performance in the classroom, or their absences, or even visits to the nurse or counselor, as a way to, as a sign that they are in need of some sort of support.
Betsy, and I will just
Yeah.
add, because we didn't put it as an example, but of course is very relevant in all your work in schools and districts, is a parent concern or a parent, noted nomination
Oh,
of
good
needing
point.
assistance or bringing records. That concern of a caregiver or a teacher would, of course, fit in a screening system. We just tend to highlight the using data to screen because that's what sometimes our school systems are missing. We're usually not missing the concern of the parent or teacher, but they would definitely fit in the screening decision rules. So just wanted to note that since it wasn't on the slide.
No, thank you so much for saying that, because I do think that oftentimes it is a parent or a
Mhm.
teacher that is noting the concerns. So we don't want to disregard that. Data
Sure.
is just one piece of that screening. So thank you. So we want to think about, oh, I'm going to cover that for a second. We want to think about um, our tier 2 system is for all students. Everyone should have access to intervention at tier 2. And so we wanted to get a sense from you guys, how currently are students with disabilities included in that screening process, if they are? And then are they included in your interventions and support process? We would love to hear if that is currently happening, if students with disabilities are able to access tier 2 supports, or if you found any barriers with that. So let us know in the chat. Students with disabilities, how are they currently fitting into your tier 2 system? And they're not is totally an appropriate answer, totally
Just
okay
gonna
to
say
say.
that, Betsy. So it's sometimes we find that it's Betsy. I was gonna say it too, Betsy. Sometimes we find that's where our gap is. So we need to include
Yeah.
them. That maybe we've become, we're thinking that because they're a student with disability, they're already kind of covered. And we haven't included them in our screening process. Or I know I've been in real life meetings where we ran our screening criteria, and they'll say, "Oh, well, that student's a student with disability." we still, if they are flagged in our criteria, we want to ensure we're putting in that tier two intervention support for them. Because a lot of our students with disabilities may not even have behavioral supports already identified on their individual education plans, depending on their needs and their goals. So we're just curious. Oh, I see some as I'm chatting away here. Let me
Hey.
see. Are mixed, not just and Steve, we love that. And majority of your students okay. So if they are already, we see two of you, and thanks Jessica and Steve so much for your engagement today. But the majority she was saying are students with disabilities. And I
Okay.
bet that W was supposed to be before that D. But the same data system to track. I love that, Rebecca. And that we mix them up. I saw from Steve's comment. So we do want this to be, as Betsy said, at every ed, everybody's included in your screening process. Um, oh, I love that comment, Jennifer Smith. Wonderful. And sorry, Betsy, I was jumping in and help you with the chat. So you just tell me to
No,
be
I
quiet.
appreciate that. I can't see it. So
She was saying students with disabilities are gen ed first, and we are layering tier two interventions that are aligned with currently what they're receiving already from their IEP goals. So love, 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 Jennifer Smith. Very
yes,
nice.
that's awesome. Hi, Jennifer.
And then we had one right above her that were saying that some of them have BIPs, even if they have BIPs as their tier three support, data collection processes in place, they're receiving ongoing interventions. So sometimes to Teresa, I hope I'm saying that name correctly, that we see that they're getting tier three interventions, we're layering them. So I love that too. And same above, we had lots of comments around students with disabilities are included as part of that screening. So I love hearing all of those comments in the chat.
I do too. I honestly, I really like that warms my heart. So thank you guys. So, if you're coaching teams through their tier two system, those are some of the questions that we're going to want to ask. How are students with disabilities included? How are they included in interventions? How are we aligning that with their IEPs? And it sounds like a lot of you are already doing these things. How are they also included at tier one? So making sure they're accessing the tier one system, that's for everybody. I have definitely had instances where there was a perception that tier one was just for students in general education. And so some of our self-contained classrooms weren't engaging in that tier one system. So we want to make sure that they are part of our system and that they are able to access both tier one, tier two, and tier three. And so, sorry, that's our last slide. So we're going to be moving on to the next key coaching element at tier two, and that is planning intervention. So we're going to start with a discussion. What are some currently of the interventions that you're using at tier two? So for behavior, for resiliency, what are your schools or your districts using at tier two? Can you think of some of the tools that come to your mind? So some of the popular ones we see:
Oh,
check in, check
Jessica.
out,
Yep.
social
Thank
skills.
and Jessica just chatted check in, check out. Okay, it's a very popular one. We're going to use the
Yes.
examples. Jessica, love it. And just to test out our little definition there from the tier fidelity inventory includes all three of those elements. Thanks. I see lots of other ones. Direct intervention through small groups. Steve said both push in and pull out, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in social skill instructional groups, Steve. So love that. Check in, check out, CNC, and oh, overcoming obstacles, Jennifer Smith. Excuse me. I know that's one curriculum one of my districts has approved to use. That's free in a social skill evidence-based curriculum. So CNC, I'm guessing is that check and connect. Can I just guess, Jennifer Smith? And then small groups, I see. Thank you. Sorry, I was slow to read that one. Mentoring systems. We're going to talk a little bit about mentoring later. So I see mentoring twice there. Great, guys. All great examples. And Jennifer
Awesome.
Smith, just let me know if I missed the CNC and it's something else. It could totally be something else. I just totally guessed check and connect. But all those examples are great as far as capturing the three components of what we encapsulate in a tier two critical feature of an intervention that makes it a tier two.
Awesome. Thank you guys. You're a great group. You've been really responsive in the chat, and that
Love
helps
it.
us so much
I know, I
as we
love it,
know
love
we're
it.
connecting with you. Yeah. So this time of year, you see on the bottom, it says October. this is a great time of year to start identifying and planning interventions. And so some of the things we want to make sure we're building into our tier 2 framework are, what are those entry criteria going to be to determine what students need tier 2 intervention, and making sure that the team has a thorough understanding of what intervention means, how we define it as being tier 2. And then when you're selecting your interventions, you want to make sure you're considering all those critical features that good interventions have, like they focus on providing additional instruction. They're happening consistently on an ongoing basis, and that all students are going to get that ongoing practice that we need to make sure that those concepts are sinking in. And then the feedback about their performance or their demonstration of those skills, so that they can continue to work on them. And lastly, we want to identify what success looks like. You know, what are we going to have as those next steps or fading or exit criteria for students that are receiving tier 2 intervention. So I think we've already talked a little bit about what your tier 2 interventions are. We want to make sure that we still consider function at tier 2. We kind of do it in a little bit of a different way than we do at tier 3, but we still consider function when we're looking for behavioral interventions for students. So at tier 2, we're doing things like using data from the screening to help determine function, to match to the ready to go interventions, like some of the ones that you see here on the right. These are interventions that we know we have at tier 2, and we want to identify what functions are best supported by that intervention. So that might be that students are trying to get something like attention, something sensory, objects, or they're trying to avoid something. So we want to make sure that, you know, we have an understanding as coaches of how function fits into this, and that we share that with our faculties and staff, so they get the understanding that we want to make sure that our instruction and intervention best matches the function of the behavior. And then we can use our screening data, you know, to help us to determine how to match students with those ready to go interventions that match that function. It's not a full FBA at tier 2. That's what we do at tier 3. This is just more of a setting up the system so that we can best identify an intervention that will work for the students. You have anything else you want to add on this one, Kat?
No, I just reiterated what you said in the chat box, because again, all of you, most of you were representing like coaching roles, and often you'll have to talk through those concepts we just were saying. Is that the ones you mentioned in the chat box were on our screen because they're often, as Betsy said, our go-tos. Those what we call standard protocol that work for lots of functions. So they're good powerhouse interventions that you want to have ready to go and set up, and we'll use a couple of them in intervention examples at the end. That's it. You did great, Betsy.
Oh, thanks. So the last key coaching element at tier 2 that we're going to talk about is identifying tools to help us progress monitor and have decision rules for evaluating outcomes. So you can see on your screen here some examples of rating scales that we can apply to the school-wide expectations. And these give us some quick feedback about a student's behavior. They can be done once a day. They can be done throughout the day. It really depends on the needs of the student and the requirements of that intervention. So using a behavior report card like the ones that you see here, it meets all the requirements for tier 2 progress monitoring data. And it has that added bonus of being tailored to that core curriculum that we have at tier 1 for behavior. Here are just a couple of other examples of different tools that we can use to progress monitor. And you can see that they can be tailored to elementary school, middle school, high school. And these tools can also be used as self-monitoring tools, but we would need to provide that instruction and support for the students using that. Kat's going to talk more about self-monitoring as an intervention later on, but we wanted to just give you an idea of how these tools can work for different interventions and at different grade levels.
Yeah, and Betsy, I was just going to add the link and then she's going to give you a couple more here because we try to, again, you as coaches, it helps a lot on a campus. Pick that they're all daily progress reports or behavior report cards. Those terms are used together, but they're all that format. So if you have that format on a campus, you can adjust it. Is kind of the walkaway point here to be based on your age group, your needs, attendance, organization. She's going to show some attendance ones here in a middle in a minute. But to Betsy's point, the tool itself can be adjusted. So you don't have to go over lots of methods of progress monitoring. You can use the one tool and adjust it for your needs. And Betsy, I apologize. You probably said that as I was chatting to catch someone up in the chat box, but that's the point walk away here is that you'll see several examples of how the same tool can be adjusted.
Yeah, no, I don't think I said it quite that eloquently. But this is that attendance example that Kat was just referring to, that you can adjust to meet the needs of your grade levels or the target of those interventions. And the one on the right-hand side can be used by the student to self-monitor some of those things, coming to class on time. So attendance and tardies can be part of this monitoring. And here's another adaptation for middle school. And so this is just some of those skills that that student needed to work on, very specific skills, and a place to track those assignments. And this could be something that could be used within a check-in, check-out intervention to help that person that's working with the student to, give them feedback on how they're doing. This could be reviewed at the end of the day to help them with that ongoing progress.
Oh,
And so, oh,
was just
sorry,
gonna,
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna, we had a chat box question. I know you can't see it. Jennifer Smith,
Nope.
thank you. I saw she just got it. We had embedded a link, and I will go over it again in a second to a really pretty thorough guide we borrowed from our friends at Tennessee's Technical Assistance Network, one of our partner networks. But the daily progress report link is also listed in this slide. So we put it a couple places throughout the presentation, Jennifer and others, because I know that's something I like to have handy. And then we also adjusted the daily progress report as a tool. We gave you some examples with either social or you could adjust it for our Florida resiliency skills. So just because the question just came up, Betsy, I was just noting we put it in here as well on the student progress monitoring side. But do you want to talk about the
Yes.
fidelity
Oh,
links?
absolutely. And I think this is one of those tricky areas as coaches to help others to see. First, we need them to see the value in monitoring fidelity and monitoring student progress. It is a big ask to monitor students' behavior throughout the day. And it does take a bit of practice and coaching. So, I urge you when you use these tools to make sure that your participants, your teachers and staff have a thorough understanding of how they work and how important and integral they are to the system. So we look at both fidelity and progress monitoring, student outcome progress monitoring, and then fidelity as being tools that we need at tier 2 within our system. The tier 2 fidelity monitoring helps us to see if we're actually doing the interventions as intended. And if we aren't, then we do need to figure out how to make adjustments for that. And obviously, the monitoring of the student performance is going to tell us if what we're doing is having the outcomes we want to see. So here are some tools that you can use for both fidelity and for progress monitoring that are really helpful. And I believe that all of these are linked, so you can have some examples ready to go to use.
They are, Betsy, great job. And then on the bottom, the student progress monitoring, we also put some graphing. I know a lot of districts use their own little graphing templates, but if you do still need the old school graphing Excel, we put them in there, both individual graphing tool and at the bottom, a system response. You can see how overall interventions are being effective, which is just as important as that individual response. So all of them are embedded in that slide. And I forgot to mention earlier, someone had relayed, you do have to use the PDF of the slides. Once you download them from the LiveBinder link that Brooke and myself shared, you can click on all those links to take you to the resources. Otherwise, keep moving. Betsy, you're doing great.
Oh. So the last thing that I wanted to share is in regard to that exit criteria. And I think this is a concept that I feel like hasn't gotten enough attention, but it's so critical. We want to make sure that at tier two, at tier three, and in students with IEPs, that we have an exit criteria so that we can have the student have an outcome at the end of this, and we can see if that outcome has been positive. Do we feel like they're getting a good return on their investment in terms of their intervention? Are they meeting their goals? And can we fade that intervention away and just have them receiving that tier one instruction for behavior? Or are we not seeing the kinds of gains that we want to see? So are they improving some, but not enough to really impact their quality of functioning at school? And so what are we going to do if students aren't making gains like they should be? Having some ideas about what we are going to do, those potential actions that we are going to have in the event of a positive response, a questionable response, or a poor response, and making sure that we have a system in place that tells us what to do when they get to that exit criteria step, and this is where the student is. So this is a little graphic that can show you what some of those potential actions could be. And now Kat is going to walk you through some examples of what this looks like in real life.
Thank you, Betsy. You can go ahead and move to the first one. So we want to apply this concept of when she was talking through all the parts of coaching, just put it together for a second, because in real life, once you put all these parts together, right, it gets real busy. But to the point she just wrapped us up with, we want to have, if we have an intervention that's successful on our campus, and we gave you one put together here, this is actually stolen from our friend Kathleen Lane at one of our other networks. But it is called an intervention grid. We hyperlinked it for you, but you'll see this is one of the ones you put in the chat box. So check in, check out, BEP, Behavior Education Program, a description for how we describe it to staff, and then right off the bat, the screening. And I put the screening there. What's our entry? If that helps in your campus to describe it as entry criteria versus screening, go for it. However, it helps your educators with that concept. But here, the entry criteria has composed of several different outcomes, very similar to what Betsy reviewed at the beginning when you want to use data to screen. So if you're not familiar with the SRSS, that is a behavioral screening tool, the student risk screening scale, and we have from elementary all the way up to high school. They have, if you're using a screening tool, and we don't have many Florida districts that are doing that, they come with cut scores. So how Betsy reviewed other data being like the ODRs that you see in this one, two or more being that cutoff score that we're screening to enter this intervention. Screening tools are nice because they already come with those criteria built into them. But if you don't use screening and you want to just ignore that part to this example, you see there they have that office discipline referrals as one of those cutoff. Tardies or absences is another one that we encourage, because check in, check out is not only successful for reducing behaviors that are problematic and increasing replacement expectation behaviors, but also is effective at increasing attendance, which we know is a very big need in our state and other states right now. And then don't forget, this is where you can bring in that academic. I know some of you were mentioning that you are academic as well as behavioral coaches in this MTSS approach, which we love. So you can use both, because sometimes the absence of an academic behavior or a grade is because of behavioral barriers. So I love this one that we pulled, and she does have an elementary version as well, but this is just the middle school that we pulled, middle and high. But to build on that, not only do we have the screening criteria, but then we identify in this intervention, just like we were talking about with coaching, what's our data that we're going to use to progress monitor. Before we even start a student in this intervention, we want to know, uh-oh, I see Zoom on my screen. Betsy, where'd you go? There we are. So as far as progress monitoring and that fidelity piece, they have identified that right off the bat. We're going to use that DPR that we looked at several examples of, a daily progress report, and we have a checklist for fidelity. Last but definitely not least, there is an exit criteria. And Betsy had just ended us with you got to have some idea of what decisions we're going to make. And I can't say this enough because when I was in schools doing this, I'm sure you've been there, all of you on this call. If you get to a meeting after you've been implementing an intervention for like 6 weeks, you want to know really easily, did they respond the way we wanted or not? And without having that exit criteria, I joked in the chat box, but I have a supervisor who used to do this at district level all the time. It does become like the Bates Motel. They'll never get out because we don't really know, did they succeed or not? Like, what's our fading criteria? So, even though I know this is some of the nerdier parts of the approach, they are vital to success here. So that's why we included it, put all the parts together here of what we want to see in an intervention for decisions. So if you'll just take me through one, thank you, Jason, for the clapping. If you want to take me one more slide, Betsy, we'll keep
Oh,
going.
yes. And you did have a question in the chat. Jennifer Smith was asking about screening tools, if there was a place where she
Oh,
could see the
yes.
list of screening tools.
Um,
That's why you saw my slide. I was trying to get it up for her, but
Brooke Curtis, I'm going to ask, or Jason, I'm going to ask one of you guys. We have this screening list in our tier two resources that we did not
Mhm.
hyperlink here. If you wouldn't mind hyperlinking that document for Miss Jennifer, I would greatly
Awesome.
appreciate it. We have it in our tier two resources live binder, but we'll get it for you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Screeners, man, that field takes off and it changes a lot. But we have one list from our National Center we're happy to provide. And then Kathleen Lane's site is CIT3, and it's great for screeners if you want some more information on those. So description, you've probably seen this slide before because we have it all over the world and we do it in our tier two training from Leanne Hawkins and friends that developed the BEP check in, check out. If you haven't gotten the little manual that's pictured there, the manual is great because it gives you a lot of the things we've been going through today, plus lots of other resources in them. But the description on that last intervention grid was kind of thin to me. So I find the visual of what the key components of are the intervention, like we use in the slide, that's why we use it a lot, is a lot more helpful when I'm coaching educators on what this intervention's critical features are. So we've talked about them several times throughout today, but we enter the intervention with our screening criteria. We do then have to plan it. So remember the coaching practice here is that we plan these interventions and they're ready to go for our students to enter those interventions. And we're going to talk about that in just a second as part of this example. Like we do have to have these things planned out, but back to that description part and explaining them to educators, I find the visual part is very helpful versus just that written description that was in the intervention grid. So we wanted to give you both as far as a coaching approach here. So when Betsy reviewed the fidelity tool that we gave you in an earlier slide, it includes check-ins on all of these critical features of the interventions. And the other thing to this nice visual explanation is it shows that idea of getting out of the Bates Motel, that there is exit criteria that goes with the intervention. So it's all those pieces put together in one. Thank you so much, Brooke Curtis. I just saw she put that in there for you, Jennifer. That's a nice list of some validated measures for behavioral screening tools if you are interested in that. And like I said, Kathleen Lane is our national expert on screening. She's great. She is very funny if you've ever seen her present, but she's another expert in screeners that we had pulled some of her examples in here today. And that was the CIT3 reference if you want to Google that. So if we'll keep going, that's what we want to put this in as your planning. So if we have to plan this intervention, we want to leave you with some coaching pieces on this because I don't know about you guys and your experiences right now. I do know for sure schools are super busy places. So if we don't plan it out, and we mentioned that in the timeline of coaching right now, that a key thing to our early part of the year is we're planning out and making sure interventions are ready to go for tier two. We don't want to have to stop right now. It's the end of the quarter in most of our districts right now. So it's a perfect time where we're getting a lot of data from our first quarter. We are seeing what we want to use for our screening criteria, and we want an intervention that's ready to go, which means we had to plan it. Um, check in, check out. We're just continuing with this example. Once you plan it, is a nice, practical, easy peasy intervention to have on your campus. But if we don't take the time to plan it out, it's not so easy peasy. And we find it's very challenging. And a lot of people abandon the intervention, even though it's really successful at needs pre-K to 12. because of the planning that we needed to do, it didn't happen. And so now it's become really messy. So we wanted to leave you with some of like breaking out the steps to planning. And we've kind of been through them today. We're just putting all the parts back together. But that's screening. Step one, what are our prereqs to enter this intervention? We have to identify then students, which I said we're at the end of the quarter. It is prime season in schools for using screening criteria to match to interventions. And then we need to have people who are ready to do that check in out, excuse me, check in, check out. The mentoring part of it is that beginning of the day and that check in, and then the end of the day, that check out. And then step four is the DPRs, the daily progress reports that Betsy reviewed several examples of. We want to have those templates ready. We don't want to have each educator on the campus have to recreate or learn what those are. We want to have some templates that we can share as coaches that are ready for them on campus. That's one of the biggest things we can do to help all educators on the campus is have the stuff ready to go for them. So, because I know that is one of the things that you need the most as busy coaches, hyperlinked here is from our friends at the Tennessee Technical Assistance Network. I will just give a shout out. One of their leaders used to work with our project, and I miss her very much. But they have a beautiful guide that I promised I would reference her to, and that's Dia Davis. But they have a guide that has all the implementation materials ready for you that you can take from, you can adjust. And I'm going to show you an example from that same guide in just a minute that I know I found really helpful when I was in schools as far as roles and responsibilities and what this looks like on a campus. So one more slide, if Betsy can keep going, as
Oh,
far as
and I just
plan.
wanted to, oh,
Go
sorry. I
ahead.
just
No,
wanted
go
to add
ahead.
one thing that I think is a great connection to that function piece that we talked about earlier. So a great example of how we look at function at tier two is check in, check out. If we have students that the function of their behavior is escaping, adult attention, if they're trying to, if they do not like adult attention, check in, check out probably wouldn't be a great intervention for them. It doesn't meet the function of their behavior. So I like to give that example because I think a lot of times we use check in, check out as our go-to intervention, but we do need to be mindful that some students, it can be kind of aversive.
Of course. And if you do have the manual, it gives some really nice ways, and we mentioned that in the function slide, that you can adjust this intervention for various function because Betsy's spot on. It's originally intended for our attention-seeking students. Now, I guarantee you have some of those on your campus, but her point is very valid that you'd have to do some adjustments there. Um, we won't spend a lot of time here, but again, our point was to operationalize the planning steps. So if you've gone through all these steps and don't have that big implementation guide and manual, this is the last part that you have to go through and train the students in. What is it going to look like for them to be in check-in, check-out? Your check-in, check-out mentor or coordinator, some schools have both, that's overseeing the intervention and mentoring. They have to know what they're doing during those parts. So that's all part of the planning that we coach. So like I said, that manual or sample implementation guide I just gave you is great for kind of showing you what this looks like that you can adjust for your campus. But the other step seven that you see there is what does that quick check-in or feedback by the teacher look like? Because that's a place where it can go really wrong really quickly if we don't kind of show what does it look like to give that quick positive feedback using the DPR for a teacher versus some other like error correction or kind of noting what we didn't do well during that, but it's not part of the intervention. And then last two steps there are just the other things that we have to plan. And if you'll just go one more, Betsy, I'll kind of show, I think I have the next example in there. Yes. So to all those steps, if we operationalize the steps, I mentioned this guide a second ago, but this one's great for all those steps we just mentioned. What do the roles look like? And again, I see a lot of schools that have great guides like this, like we do at Tier 1, but this is a really nice one, and it's on page 7 and 8 of the guide that we hyperlinked. What does the role and procedures look like? So those steps of planning we just noted in those slides. Here's what it looks like to then plan that intervention and then share with staff what it looks like on the campus to implement that. So we hyperlink that for you. And again, big thanks to our Tennessee friends with that guide. You may already have something like this at your district guidance level or school, but we wanted to give you one to take away just to have as a reference with all those planning steps. And then we can keep going to our, so if check and check out is a little scary to you, or if that's not one that's ready to go on your campus, we do here because there's a lot of planning involved. This is one that actually I did not do in schools, but when I first heard about it, I was like, this cannot be a thing. And it totally is a thing. And it's actually really effective for mentoring as a light tier 2 mentoring approach. And it's called the 2 by 10. Anyone have any of you tried this 2 by 10 strategy? If you have, I'd love to see a thumbs up or a yes in the chat box. But back to modeling, putting it together. Here, if you are looking for a really light way to start that's really approachable for educators, and I put some sample entry criteria there. Maybe they've had a couple minor classroom incidences, not to the degree of an ODR yet, or maybe they've had 1 or 2 ODRs. That would even be appropriate here. The other link here is attendance. This approach is really noted to be effective with attendance as a mentoring approach. So maybe they've had a missed number of days already in this quarter or unexcused absences, and that they've just haven't been at school the number of days we know to make them successful as that screening decision rule. 2 by 10, super simple. You are literally taking 2 minutes a day for 10 days in a row and applying it with a student that's had either a little bit of behavioral trouble, lack of attendance, or had some classroom disruptions that you've noted. So again, when I first heard about this, and I was like, that can't be a thing. And I heard about it again and again at conferences and how successful it's been. I just share it all the time now because I think it's such a practical approach and a structured approach to mentoring that is known to impact attendance and influence attendance, plus limit disruptive behavior. Plus, any of my mental health listening on the call, it's that connection to school and that adult connection. So, if you said mentoring in the chat and you don't have a structure for it, this is a great practical one for our teachers that could adjust 2 minutes a day for 10 days in a row, and it's worked across all grade levels. And there's even an adjustment there on the screen for virtual. So again, nice adjustment. If check and check out was like, wow, that's a lot of planning. Here's a little lighter that's a mentoring approach. It could be function based across all different functions. And then if you switch to the next slide for me, I gave you one more resource to take away today. That one is super simple in and of itself, and I've read a lot of articles of different educator takes on it. But if you want a little more detail to that, as far as the 2 minutes, 10 days in a row, it's hyperlinked here from a vendor that had a tip sheet around it. And then if you do have educators, sometimes we struggle even with this simple approach of how do we talk to students because we want it to be driven by them. We want it to be interest-based. If the whole idea is to get to know that student and build that relationship, that get to know you question is prompted or linked, excuse me, in the slide for you. Because again, if we're in that coaching practice of planning it, the biggest thing we can do is have some stuff ready to go for educators to implement the strategy. And again, we want them to have a voice here on what's interesting to them and them to drive the conversation. So some get to know you prompts are listed there in case that's helpful. Betsy, I think we can keep going, and I think we'll have time for at least 1 or 2 more. We had 2 more examples. We didn't know if we'd get through all of them, but wanted to leave you with them. So that's a mentoring one. Self-monitoring. I apologize, friends, for the busy slide. Those of you who've been with me before know I love busy slides, and it does drive some crazy. But if you put together, this is our example 3, self-monitoring. So self-monitoring, just to put together all the parts, taking from that intervention grid idea that we went through, there's the entry criteria that this particular example would be appropriate entry into self-monitoring as an intervention. Want to note a couple things on that entry screening criteria there. You will see, even though that's outside of our state, the Skyward. I know a lot of districts use Skyward. Missing assignments. That is way more familiar than I would like it to be for my own boys in my household. We do a lot of self-monitoring around missing assignments and are they tracking their own assignments? It's a great entry criteria if you're seeing students with that as a barrier to what we call self-monitoring. So if you use that same idea of, I'll let you glance through the entry criteria, then the description. What is it? What is self-monitoring? And it's usually educators, one of your favorites, because it's not a lot of educator time once you get it going. This is for students, and that's why it's in red in the box in the middle there. They have to already have the skill. They know how to do this skill. They just need a little help and structure in promoting that they actually do it. And they have to be able to discriminate between, for example, the assignments. Did I turn in the assignment or did I not turn the assignment in? The steps are listed at the bottom just for you to walk away with an example of a description of what this intervention is. And then last but not least, remember your Bates Motel reference, there's exit criteria. So what's going to take them out of the intervention, or perhaps suggest that they need a different tier 2 intervention or a more intense approach to their interventions. So Betsy, if you'll just keep moving for us, I'll show some examples of the steps there. So remember, Betsy's had reviewed with you, we've got to have a method that's a coaching piece. How are we progress monitoring? And the nice thing to self-monitoring is that the tool itself, that you're self-monitoring, becomes the progress monitoring tool. So it's nice because it's already out there. It's part of the intervention, plus it's doubling up as data on success. She mentioned there's all kinds of formats that can work for this, but she had mentioned the DPR, the daily progress report, up in the top middle left there. That is one tool that can be used for self-monitoring if the student does already have the skills and doesn't need the additional instruction. Other methods there, it could be a check sheet, just the presence and AM and PM for Jasmine there, that she's doing some of those behaviors. And then on the bottom, I love this one because I was one that loved to call out as a student. And if I was self-monitoring, my colleagues know I still struggle with that skill a little bit. When I have to raise my hand and wait to be called on, this particular student is self-monitoring. Are they doing that when they need help in particular? So if, especially our secondary population, if they need help when they don't understand something, are they using those skills that they know will get them to that help or access? So did I raise my hand, not only raise my hand, but wait for that teacher to call on me? Did I use that skill of telling the teacher what I didn't understand or how I didn't understand it? Maybe I'm asking a question to help me understand it. Did I actually stop to listen to try to understand or use some of those strategies before I did other things? So we always use that example at the bottom to be a different approach, still self-monitoring, but I have the skills to do those things if I'm using self-monitoring. Yes, Steve, I agree. Sorry, I get excited when I see Steve was saying it's a great tool to empower students. Um, Definitely, it's a life skill, right? We all have to self-monitor as in our work, in our job, in our life. So it is definitely a great way to empower a skill that's going to be a life skill for that student. And then last but not least, because we like to leave you with coaching resources, if you need them, there's a little link there to other examples of self-monitoring tools. And that will, I know, I didn't know if we'd have time to get through all of them, but I will wrap up this one and then just leave you with the social skills. Quick reference, secondary again, it can be as simple as just your grade sheet. We gave you check and connect as a monitoring form, which is actually a more structured mentoring, but I can't say that enough with secondary. Sometimes it's just using your Skyward or your Focus. For my particular students, they use a different platform in their district. I coach my son to use his own grading that he's tracking himself on, did I turn in my things? Did I do my formatives to get to my summatives? So use your own grading to be simple here with self-monitoring. It doesn't have to be super complicated as some of those other formats. We will leave you with the social skills intervention. We mentioned tier 1 is built on social skill instruction. So just to leave you with this one, if you are doing social skills as tier 2 or resiliency skill instruction, you're doing it because they're having trouble acquiring a skill that was taught or an expectation rule routine that was taught in tier 1. So if they're needing more acquisition or instruction, that's where your group instruction is going to come into play. And we gave you some examples of entry and exit just to keep modeling that. And last, if you have approved curricula, like someone had mentioned, overcoming obstacles in the chat box, there are many evidence-based programs for this approach, but they'll all follow those critical components that you see in the routine there in the bottom. They tell, they show, they do, they practice, and then they monitor progress. So we left you with that one since we are out of time. We didn't think we'd get through all 4, but we wanted to give them to you. We thank you for joining us today. Please do the poll for us for some feedback that Betsy had mentioned. And then do take the rest of the slides that had some additional social skill instruction resources or Florida resiliency materials for you.